My brother slid the envelope across the Thanksgiving table like he was tipping a valet. "Go ahead," he said, leaning back in his chair with that grin he'd been wearing since high school. "Open it." Everyone was watching. My mother, my aunt, my brother's girlfriend, who had known our family for exactly 4 months and already acted like she owned the good china. I picked up the envelope. It was thin. The kind of thin that already tells you the answer before you ask the question. Inside was a single lottery scratch ticket. Not a winner. He had already scratched it. "Figured you could use the practice," my brother said. "You know, dreaming about money you'll never actually have." The table laughed. Not all of it, but enough. I was 27 years old, sitting in the house I grew up in, holding a losing scratch ticket on my birthday, which happened to fall 2 days after Thanksgiving every single year. It had always been swallowed by the holiday. My cake was usually the leftover pie. My gifts were usually an afterthought. But this was the first time someone had looked me in the eye while doing it. I set the ticket down next to my plate. I picked up my fork. I finished my green beans. I did not cry. I had learned a long time ago that crying in that house was just giving people more material. What I did instead was something that took me another 3 hours to decide. Lying on the narrow bed in my childhood room, staring at the ceiling with its water stain shaped like a mitten. I made a quiet decision that I would tell no one. Not my mother. Not my coworker Dana, who I told everything. No one. Because I had learned something else in that house, something I had taken years to fully understand. Information was currency, and I had been spending mine freely for years while everyone else saved theirs up to use against me. I want to tell you a little bit about my brother first, because none of what comes later makes sense without understanding who he was in that family. My brother was 4 years older than me, which meant he had 4 extra years to become my parents' favorite before I even arrived to compete. He had been the kind of kid who got away with everything by being charming about it. He failed a class in 8th grade, and my father took him out for steak. I got a B+ in AP chemistry, and my mother asked why it wasn't an A. He wrecked the car at 19, and my parents paid the deductible without a conversation. When I asked to borrow $300 for a nursing certification exam, my mother said they were tight that month. That was the same month they put new floors in my brother's apartment. I am not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you understand that by the time I was 27 and sitting at that Thanksgiving table, I had already spent years slowly accepting that this was simply how things were. My brother was the investment. I was the liability. He was the future. I was the obligation. The scratch ticket just made it loud. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I went to work at the hospital where I had been a registered nurse for 3 years. I worked the cardiac step-down unit, which meant my patients were stable enough not to be in the ICU, but sick enough that nobody stopped paying attention. It was the kind of work that required you to be fully present, which I had always been grateful for, because it left no room for the noise in my head. My charge nurse, that shift was a woman named Roberta. She was 53, had 2 grown kids, had been a nurse for 26 years, and had the specific kind of patience that only comes from having seen genuinely everything. She had known me since I was a new graduate, fumbling through my first IV placement. She brought terrible gas station coffee to every shift and always offered me the first cup. That morning, she looked at me for about 4 seconds and said, "What happened?" It was not a question. I told her about the scratch ticket. I told her about the table laughing. I told her about lying on my childhood bed staring at the water stain shaped like a mitten. Roberta handed me the coffee. She said, "And what are you going to do about it?" Also not a question. "I don't know yet," I said. "Yes, you do," she said. "You just haven't said it out loud." She was right. I had actually known since about 2 in the morning on that Friday after Thanksgiving, when I had pulled up my bank account on my phone and done some math I had been avoiding for almost a year. Here is what I had not told my family, or Dana, or really anyone. I had been saving aggressively for 14 months. I had picked up extra shifts, declined vacations, eaten most of my meals at home, and quietly put every spare dollar into an account my mother did not know existed at a credit union across town from the bank, where my father had opened my first checking account when I was 16. I had done this because somewhere in the back of my mind I had understood, even before I could articulate it clearly, that the only way out of that family dynamic was financial independence so complete that I would never need to ask them for anything again. I had enough for a down payment on a small house. Not a large house, not a beautiful house, but a house with a door that I controlled. I told Roberta. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "So the question isn't what you're going to do. The question is how long you're going to wait to do it." I put in an offer the following Saturday. It was accepted on Tuesday. I want to be very clear about something, because this matters for what comes later. I did not tell my family I was buying a house. I did not tell them I had savings. I did not tell them I had been looking at listings for 6 weeks, or that I had already been pre-approved, or that I had a real estate agent named Carl who wore the same blue jacket to every showing and always pointed out the water pressure in the master bath first thing. I told them nothing. When my mother called that Tuesday evening, I talked to her for 11 minutes about whether my cousin's new boyfriend seemed serious. I did not mention that I had just signed paperwork that would change my entire life. I closed on the house 8 weeks later, in January. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street, built in 1962, with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed new countertops and a backyard that was mostly mud, but had one spectacular oak tree that I decided I loved immediately. The previous owners had left a bird feeder hanging from the lower branch. It was empty, but it was there. I did not throw a housewarming party. I did not post pictures. I moved in over a single weekend with the help of Roberta and her husband, who had a truck, and Dana, who I had finally told 2 weeks before closing because I could not keep it in anymore, and because she showed up with a bottle of wine and packing tape and asked 0 questions that felt like judgment. I hung my own curtains. I assembled my own furniture. I filled that bird feeder with the kind of seed the internet said cardinals liked. On the first morning I woke up in that house, I made coffee in my own kitchen and stood at my own back window and watched a female cardinal land on that feeder, look around like she was assessing the situation, and then eat. I stood there for a long time. I had been in the house for 2 months before my family noticed anything was different. My brother noticed first, actually, which surprised me. He called on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual because he almost never called me directly, and asked if I was still living at the apartment I had rented for the past 2 years. "Why?" I asked. "Mom's trying to mail you something," he said. I gave him my new address without explaining anything. He asked why I had moved. I said I had wanted more space. He said something like nice in a tone that suggested he found this mildly interesting but not worth pursuing, and we hung up. 2 weeks later, my mother sent me a birthday card to the new address. She had forgotten my birthday was in November, and this card arrived in March. Inside, she had written a note asking if I was doing okay and mentioning that my brother had been going through some things. She did not elaborate on the things. The card was signed Love, Mom, with a small smiley face that for some reason made my chest feel tight in a way I couldn't immediately explain. I put the card in the drawer of my nightstand. I don't know why I kept it. The things my brother was going through turned out to be fairly serious. I found this out in April, not from my family, but from an aunt who called me directly, which was how I knew it was bad. The aunt who called directly was my mother's sister, and she had the specific communication style of someone who believed information should be delivered as quickly as possible without regard for cushioning. My brother had been let go from his job, not laid off. Let go. I didn't ask for more detail, and she didn't offer it. He had also, apparently, been behind on his rent for the past 3 months, something that had been obscured by a series of partial payments and promises to his landlord that had recently run out. His girlfriend had moved out, which was recent enough that I could still picture her at that Thanksgiving table, holding her wine glass with both hands. "Your parents are trying to help him," my aunt said. "But they don't really have the money right now. The furnace had to be replaced." I said I was sorry to hear that. I asked my aunt how she was doing. We talked for a while about her garden and her dog and a road trip she was planning to take in the fall. When I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked out the window at the oak tree, which had started to come back after winter, new leaves small and bright at the tips of the branches. I noticed I did not feel what I might have expected to feel. I had grown up believing that I would eventually feel triumphant when something hard happened to my brother, that the score would feel like it was settling. But sitting at that table, I mostly just felt tired. Not sad, exactly. Just tired in the specific way that comes from realizing something you had suspected for a long time is actually true. My family had built a structure where one person was always the floor and one person was always the ceiling. My brother had lived his whole life being held up. He had never learned what it felt like to hold his own weight. I was not happy about what was happening to him, but I also understood that I had no part in fixing it. I went back to my regular life. I picked up a Saturday shift. I bought the countertops I had been wanting for the kitchen, a pale gray quartz that made the whole room feel cleaner. I planted tomatoes in the backyard near the oak tree. Dana came over for dinner twice, and we opened wine and talked about nothing serious, which was its own kind of luxury that I had not always had. It was a Thursday evening in late May when they showed up. I had just gotten home from a long shift. I had changed out of my scrubs and was standing in my kitchen eating crackers over the sink because I was too tired to cook and too hungry to wait. My phone showed 2 missed calls from my mother, which was not unusual enough to alarm me. I was planning to call her back after I had eaten something real. The knock came at 10 minutes past 7. I looked through the peephole. My father was on the porch. My mother was standing 1 step behind him and to the left, which was where she had always stood in relation to him, slightly behind, slightly secondary, in a habit so old, neither of them probably noticed it anymore. My brother was standing at the bottom of the porch steps with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was looking at the street, not the door. Before I tell you what I did next, and how I stood there with my hand not quite touching the deadbolt, I want to ask you something. What time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? Because I want to know if you've ever stood on one side of a door while people who were supposed to love you stood on the other side of it, and felt that specific stillness that is not peace, and is not panic, but is something in between. Let me know in the comments. I stood there for what felt like a long time but was probably about 45 seconds. Then I opened the door. Not because I had decided to let them in. Because I needed to hear what they said before I made any decision at all. I had learned that lesson from nursing school. Don't assume you know what's happening based on what it looks like. My father looked older than the last time I had seen him, which had been Christmas, 5 months ago. He had always been a big man, physically large in a way that had felt like authority when I was a child. Standing on my porch he seemed smaller, or maybe the porch was the right size for a person, and I had never seen him at the right scale before. "We need to talk to you," he said. "Okay," I said. I did not step back from the doorway. My mother said, "Honey, can we come in?" My brother said nothing. He was still looking at the street. I looked at all 3 of them for a moment. Then I said, "What's going on?" What was going on? Delivered in pieces over the next several minutes on my front porch, because I still had not stepped back from the doorway, was this. My brother owed 4 months of back rent and had received a notice. My parents had tried to cover the first 2 months and had run out of capacity. My brother had applied for 6 jobs and received 2 interviews and no offers. There was a family meeting of sorts that had apparently happened without me. And the conclusion of that meeting was that the most logical solution was for my brother to move in somewhere temporarily, and the place that made the most sense was my house, because I had a 3-bedroom, and I lived alone. My mother said, "It would just be for a little while." My father said, "You have the room." My brother, who had finally turned to look at the door, said nothing. I stood there. I thought about the scratch ticket. I thought about the new graduate nursing loans I had paid off by myself. I thought about the $300 for the certification exam. I thought about the floors in my brother's apartment that my parents had funded. I thought about 14 months of picked-up shifts and skipped vacations and crackers eaten over the sink. I thought about how I had built the thing I was standing in, entirely by myself, every decision, every dollar, every Saturday morning at an open house with Carl in his blue jacket pointing at the water pressure. I thought about the cardinal at the feeder on the first morning. I said no. My mother's expression shifted in a way I recognized. It was the expression that preceded an appeal to guilt, the slight tremble in the chin, the eyes that got a little wider and a little softer, The specific look that had worked on me reliably for about 25 years. I said, "I love you. I'm not able to do this." My father said, "She's your brother." The pronoun confusion was not new. Under different circumstances, I might have found it almost funny. What he meant, I understood, was that my brother was family, and family meant obligation, and obligation was one-directional in our house, flowing always from me toward everyone else. I said, "I know who he is." There was a long pause. My mother said something about how the whole family was struggling right now, and didn't I think I had a responsibility, and she had always known I was the strong one, the capable one, which was the thing she said when she wanted me to do something hard that she would not ask of my brother. Being called the strong one in our family had never meant I was respected. It meant I was useful. I said, "I'll help you find resources." I meant this genuinely. I had already, in the 45 seconds I had spent at the peephole, started thinking about what I actually knew. A social worker at the hospital who specialized in housing assistance, a nonprofit that offered emergency rental aid, a job placement program through the county. I knew these things because of my work. I knew how to connect people to systems. That was something I could do. My mother said that was not the same thing. My father said that family helps family. My brother looked at me then, for the first time since I had opened the door. His expression was different from what I expected. I had expected the grin, or the dismissal, or the practiced charm. What I saw instead was something younger and much less defended. I think I recognized it because I had worn it myself, probably in rooms where I was hoping someone would help me and they had decided not to. I held that for a moment. I let it be real. Then I said, "I'll send you the number for the housing assistance line. They have a same-week intake. I'll also send the job placement program. They have a good placement rate for people who are between roles." I looked at my mother. "The food bank 3 blocks from your house has extended hours on Fridays. If money is tight right now, that's real help." I looked at my father. "I hope things get easier." I looked at my brother. "I mean that." Then I took a step back from the doorway, and I closed the door. I stood in my entryway for a while. I could hear them on the porch for a few minutes, voices low, and then the sound of the steps, and then a car door, and then nothing. I went back to my kitchen. I finished the crackers. I made actual dinner this time, pasta with whatever I had in the pantry, which turned out to be sufficient. I texted Roberta because I needed to tell someone, and she was the person I trusted most with the things that were both hard and right at the same time. I sent my brother the housing assistance number and the job placement program information. I sent them without a message attached, because I did not know what to say, and I did not want to say the wrong thing. He did not reply that night. He did reply 3 days later. One word, "Thanks." Lowercase. No punctuation. I looked at it for a moment, and then I put my phone down and went outside to check on the tomatoes. The tomatoes were doing well. I want to tell you what I understood, standing there in my backyard on that late May evening, better than I had ever understood it before. I had spent most of my life believing that love and obligation were the same thing, because in my family they had always been presented together, fused so thoroughly I couldn't find the seam. What I understood now was that they were completely separate. I loved my family. That was real, and it was mine, and it didn't require me to do anything in particular to prove it. Obligation was something else. Obligation was what someone demands when love alone isn't producing the result they want. I had closed the door on the obligation. I had left the love where I put it. The bird feeder needed refilling. I went inside and got the seed and came back out and filled it, and then I stood under that oak tree and waited, and after about 10 minutes the cardinal came back, the same female I thought, or one indistinguishable from her, and she landed, and she ate. I have thought a lot about what I would have said to myself at 22 or 23, if I could have gotten a message back to that version of me who was still trying so hard to earn a place that should have been freely given. I think what I would have said is this: the amount of yourself you spend trying to prove your worth to people who have already decided it will never be the right amount, not because you are not worthy, but because proof was never actually what they were asking for. What they were asking for was compliance. And compliance and love are not the same thing either. Roberta told me once, during a particularly hard shift, that the most important thing a person could do for themselves was to build a life so genuinely their own that no one else's assessment of it could reach the foundation. I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I think I do now. I went back inside my house. I locked my own door. I made tea and sat in my own living room and watched the evening go quiet outside my own window. And I thought about how every single thing in that room I had chosen deliberately, paid for honestly, and placed exactly where I wanted it. The scratch ticket my brother gave me was still in my coat pocket from Thanksgiving. I had forgotten about it. I found it the next morning when I was getting ready for a shift. That small gray rectangle already scratched clean, worth nothing. I held it for a second. Then I threw it away, which was what it had always deserved. If you've ever had to close a door on someone you love because keeping it open was costing you something you couldn't afford to keep losing, I see you. Leave me a comment and tell me what helped you most. And if this story stayed with you, Revenge Vine has more. I'll see you in the next one.